Hi, my name is Hannah Elford. I work with UNHCR in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm really excited to be joining you today. I was really happy to hear about the initiative to stream voices throughout World Refugee Day. This really is an opportunity for us to celebrate the contribution that refugees make to our community and to raise awareness about the issues these refugees face. I'm really glad to be able to contribute to this. So I've been asked to address some particular questions. The first of these is, what are the biggest issues Kenya faces in regard to integrating refugees in society? Okay, so as a country, Kenya has always been very open to refugees. It's kept its borders open for decades to its neighbouring countries and the conflicts in the region. However, recently we are seeing a growing reluctance in Kenya to allow refugees to integrate here. Refugees are allowed to stay in Kenya, and the government of Kenya does recognise refugees and have national legislation. However, refugees are not allowed to work in Kenya, and there's an encampment policy, which means they're meant to live in the refugee camps rather than integrate into society. This creates a lot of frustration in the community, as you can imagine. Now, Kenya has limited natural resources, and quite often refugees are seen as a problem because they're a drain on those resources. There's a very high local unemployment rate amongst the Kenyan population, so there's no motivation to give refugees the right to work here, as they do in Uganda. And finally, a lot of the refugees fleeing the neighbouring countries are agriculturalists by tradition, and that means that they want to come here and continue those trades and continue those skills. But the local land is used, the local fertile land is used by local Kenyans, and that's a constant source of conflict between the government and refugee communities. What are the biggest issues that refugees themselves face when trying to integrate into a new society? So, related to my first question, refugees in Kenya face particular problems because of lack of livelihoods and the reluctance of the local population to see that integration happen. A particular problem where there are refugee camps, such as in Kenya, especially long-term refugee camps like Dadaab camp that's been open since 1991, is that you have refugees that were born in the camp and were educated in the camp and completed secondary education in the camp. They grew up with a good level of education and they were taught to be ambitious, and now they've finished their education and they have nowhere to take that ambition. And this is why we often see high levels of secondary movement of refugees from their country of asylum and onto another place where they believe they can have greater opportunity. And this is one of the factors feeding into the flow of refugees up to the Mediterranean from this area in Africa. As I've mentioned earlier, the encampment policy is a huge obstacle to refugees who want to integrate here because they're not allowed to work, they're not allowed to leave the refugee camp without the government's permission, which means they're not able to contribute to the society. They're held dependent on aid in the refugee camps, on health aid and on food aid. They're not able to become self-sufficient, and they're not able to contribute and prove themselves as a positive aspect of society. More generally, in all communities around the world, when someone new moves into a new community, this is not particular to refugees, but anyone that moves into a new community, your first barrier is language, of course, then cultural difference, trying to adapt to the new place and ensure you're not offended by things, and likewise you don't offend other people. Conversion of qualifications. Remember, not all refugees have lack of education. A lot of refugees have been educated and have professions and skills and vocations and things that they can contribute to their new society. But quite often some of those qualifications will not be recognised by their new country or their new community, and they'll have to convert those qualifications and sometimes start afresh. We see this a lot with doctors from Syria, for example. So refugees are extremely positive contribution to society when governments are open to their integration. There are struggles, but there are so many ways that we can help overcome those struggles. Okay, so governments obviously have a central role in changing the conversation about refugees. Governments around the world should resist manipulating fears of insecurity in communities and scapegoating refugees as the source of that insecurity. We need to change this conversation, and we need to talk about facts rather than fears. I also believe that the government should, while respecting free press, hold the media accountable when they feed into these false fears, when they incite hate and misrepresent facts for a political agenda. I do believe that the media should be held accountable for this. All people, governments and individuals need to remember that by definition, refugees are fleeing persecution. They are searching for peace and stability. They are the champions of these concepts. They're not the enemies of peace. They're trying to find peace. And I think this is where we lose the human in this conversation. And we need to remember that rather than demonizing refugees, we need to remember that they are running away from a bad situation. They're running from violence. They're running from armed groups. They are the people who are resisting, who are not joining, who are not complying, who are resisting and searching for freedom. And we should respect them for that decision, and we should see them as champions of peace. Otherwise, I would say that we need to remember that the vast majority of refugees live in countries surrounding their country of origin. They're hosted by often low-income governments in surrounding countries, and this is particularly true in Africa. Most of those refugees live there hoping this is on a temporary basis and waiting for an opportunity to come home. But very often that isn't possible, and we end up with protracted refugee situations. Governments across the world have the opportunity to share this responsibility, this global responsibility for refugee problems, by signing up to a resettlement program. Now, this is a program where governments agree to resettle a certain quota number of recognized refugees each year, and they remove them from their country of first asylum, for example, Kenya, and they resettle them to a new country where they're given permanent residence and rights of citizenship, such as the UK. Governments should be encouraged to sign up to these resettlement programs. It's extremely important. Not only does it give that single individual or that family hope of a future and a new start, it's also a way of sharing the burden of the refugee problem from the countries that normally bear the brunt of it, and of encouraging those countries to keep those borders open to new refugees. Okay, first of all, I have to say that unfortunately, given the current levels of forced displacement that are unprecedented, no one on the globe is ever far away from the refugee crisis. Singapore was once a haven for Chinese refugees fleeing the Sino-Japanese War, and it also temporarily hosted thousands of Vietnamese boat people in the 1970s. But in the Southeast region today, Southeast Asia, only 3 of 13 countries have ratified the Refugee Convention. This means there is a lot of work to do, a lot of advocacy and a lot of lobbying to get these governments to commit to legal principles to protect refugees. There are regional instruments that encourage Southeast Asian countries to implement national legislation. However, this has not been done in the vast majority of countries. There is a lot that you can do in your countries of residence at the moment to encourage these governments to commit to the legal protection of refugees. In Singapore, you're surrounded by countries that are hosting large numbers of refugees. For example, Thailand hosts more than 100,000 refugees, and Malaysia is currently hosting over 150,000 refugees and asylum seekers. The vast majority of these refugees in both countries are from Myanmar, but they also have refugees from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, Afghanistan, and Palestine. So you have a wide variety of refugees in your region. So I would say that you're never far away from the refugee crisis, either ideologically or geographically. What can students and individuals such as yourselves who are interested in these issues or want to contribute, what can you do? Okay, first of all, I'd like to say we've come a long way. This conversation, this topic is finally on the table, and that's progress from where we were a few years ago. The first thing you can do is arm yourself with information. Read, get information about what's going on, know your topic. Remember, the best defense to ignorance is knowledge. Start conversations. Be relentless in challenging prejudice wherever you see it or hear it. Don't allow stereotypes and rhetoric to go unchallenged. I suggest that you begin within your family and within your friendship circles. Call out people who repeat falsehoods, things that you know not to be true, or who use derogatory statements about refugees without them being based on fact, or who repeat falsehoods. Now, a lot of this time this will be done without malicious intent, and perhaps they're just repeating a chorus of rhetoric they've heard in the media or from other people. But the sooner you start challenge it, and the sooner you start that conversation, the sooner people will stop repeating it mindlessly and will start thinking about what they believe rather than just speaking. This, unfortunately, will not make you the favourite at the family dinner, and I have personal experience of this. I'm quite surprised that I continue to be invited to Christmas Eve dinners, but I did, and every year I didn't allow things to go unchallenged, and every year there was a debate over the table, but this is how you begin the conversation, and you have to go in with the knowledge that you are right, the knowledge that you know the facts and that you're challenging prejudice. And you do that on a small scale, and some of those thoughts, some of those suggestions will permeate and they will make a difference. Remember, governments can only pursue populist policies as long as they are popular. Now, if we have to do this on a one-on-one basis and we challenge individuals one-to-one, then that's what you can do, and that's your contribution, and that in itself is enormous. I truly believe that people care about refugees. I truly believe that people are misguided, and that unfortunately the politicians and the media have fed into this globally. But I do believe people care, and I believe that refugees, when we humanise them again and we circulate facts rather than fears, we can change this conversation. Now, in terms of practical things of what you can do other than beginning debate, I suggest you use social media. Circulate and share things that you think are important that people know and that people read, and challenge things that you do not agree with or that you believe are false. Perhaps you could start a short magazine that you could distribute to other international schools that start conversations on these topics. Perhaps you could start a befriending project with some refugees. This could be organised through international organisations who could support you in making the first contact. And then you could write letters to individual refugees, perhaps children who are in school, and you could share your mutual daily living experiences. You can donate to funding initiatives to help refugees and integration projects. You can volunteer your time, but most of all, when you get to an age when you can, you need to vote in your national elections. We can change the conversation, we can change how popular these ideas are, but we can also change governments. Thank you very much for letting me speak today, and I wish you good luck and enjoy World Refugee Day.